Hey, North Harbor. Time for our midweek devotional, and we're looking at Acts chapter 7, the end of chapter 6 and chapter 7, about a chapter and a half. And we're introduced to Stephen. We're not really introduced. He was introduced to us last Sunday as one of the 7 men chosen to do the food, to manage the food program in Jerusalem. And that's where he's introduced to us. But he sort of takes a center stage right here. And at the same time, he wraps up this first section of Acts. We're wrapping things up. If you remember correctly, Jesus in chapter 1 said to the disciples, take this message, bear witness about me in Jerusalem, and Judea and Samaria and the ends of the world. So we're wrapping up the Jerusalem portion. This is the first section, and everything's been in Jerusalem, and now we are wrapping it up. But it comes to a very dramatic end. The transition into the next section is a rough one, particularly for Stephen. Stephen, turns out, was doing some amazing things as a disciple, some miraculous things. At the end of, in the middle of chapter 6, verse 8, it says, Stephen, a man full of God's grace and power, performed amazing miracles and signs among the people. But some other Jewish leaders step up to debate him about his theology, and they can't stand against his wisdom. And so what they do instead is trump up some false charges, and they drum up some false witnesses, and they drag them before the authorities. All right, so it's a flexing of the muscles. It's an unjust trial. It's a setup. It's similar to what we see happen with Jesus during his crucifixion. And so he goes before the authorities, and they question him. And he gives them this long story of history of Israel, and it's an amazing history of Israel in a nutshell. If you want to know what the Bible teaches, the whole Old Testament in a nutshell, read Acts chapter 8, because Stephen hits on all the major points. And finally he gets to, he talks about Abraham and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and David. And finally he gets to Solomon, King Solomon, the Old Testament, who builds the temple in Jerusalem, the one where Stephen is at, the temple where we've been talking about. The temple authorities are very upset by this new group of people. And we've been trying to get across, I've been trying to get across that what Luke is trying to do, the author, is show us that the community of Jesus followers is the new temple. That is where the presence of God is found, and the authorities have had problems with it. We've talked about that in these videos on and off since Acts chapter 1. And so it comes to a head right now, because while he's talking about Israelite history, and he comes to this section where he talks about David and Solomon building the temple, it says, David found favor with God and asked for the privilege of building a permanent temple for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who actually built it. However, he says, the Most High doesn't live in temples made by human hands, as the prophet says. Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Could you ever build me a temple as good as that? Asked the Lord. Could you build a dwelling place for me? Didn't I make everything in heaven and on earth? And so it's interesting. It's easy for us to miss, but he talks about the temple being made by human hands. And if we're not careful, if we're not familiar with our Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible, what we miss is that the Old Testament prophets, when they're confronting Israel in the Old Testament and the Israelite leaders, one of the things that they complain about, or not complain, but one of the things they bring to the attention of the leaders is the idolatry. Idolatry is when you worship material things. So in a pagan temple, you would have an idol made of stone or gold or wood or silver or something, and you bow down and worship that. And that idol is supposedly in the image of a god. Well, Judaism didn't have any idols in its temple. It was an empty space. But Stephen is saying that the temple itself was made by human hands. And so if we're not careful, we're going to miss it. What he's saying is that this building, the operation of this building, the institution of this building, the power that this building gives you, the status that it gives you, is an idol. They are furious. He goes on to say that, you guys, our ancestors killed all the prophets that came and spoke truth to them. And even that just made them even angrier. They grab him, they drag him outside the city, and they stone him. They stoned him to death. I think it's a gruesome death. It might still happen in some portions of the world today, possibly, but back then it was a common way to execute people. And so it has a very violent and dramatic death. At the end, before he dies, Stephen looks up into heaven and he has this vision of Jesus, and he says words that Jesus said on the cross. He says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And so the author Luke is trying to tell us and show us a picture of what discipleship looks like. He's saying that Stephen looks like Jesus. Stephen sounds like Jesus. Stephen is doing the same things that Jesus did. Stephen is a true disciple of Jesus, and he pays with his life, his convictions about the institutions and the power and the injustice that is going on around him. He speaks truth, and he pays with his life. A very powerful picture of discipleship. Now, fortunately for us, we don't see that very often, but I do think it challenges us to think about, standing up for justice in our world, and what are the power structures that seem to hinder justice and hinder God's kingdom. And there's a trap here for us. We got to be very careful because, the institution of the temple is a place of worship. The people that stoned Stephen are probably upstanding people in the community. Probably worship is very important to them. They have very strong convictions about what they are worshiping. And so, I think with 2,000 years between us, we can read this passage and say, oh, those are the bad guys and Stephen is the good guy. And it's very clear to see. The distinction is very clear. And I don't think in that world it was very clear. I think that people looking from the outside could say that, Stephen really didn't seem like he was open to constructive conversation with these folks. And the folks that stoned him, again, probably look like normal, regular people who are involved with a very highly prized institution in their community. So we got to be careful to cast doubt. We got to be careful because I think that the differences between Stephen and the people that execute him may seem subtle in real life. And so it really challenges us to look beneath the surface on the institutions that we see in our world. And lately, a lot of those have come under scrutiny and challenge. Politics, law and order, racism coming up in all those areas. And so government control. And so as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we need to be very careful and I think very critically about the institutions that we support or that we feel good about, and really think through, are these godly? Are they just? Are they righteous? And are we complicit in their work and in their philosophy? And all that they do. So, there's, it's not like Stephen is going up against the Roman Empire here. He's going up against a religious institution that has long history and is very dear to many people there. But it challenges us to think, very carefully about what is really going on here, and are we speaking truth to the things that maybe many people in our society accept, that kind of blindly accept because it doesn't look like an evil institution. So I don't have any specific examples. I really would like to leave that open for you to consider and to think about as you bring this prayerfully before God. And our book will take a great turn here very soon. And so we'll leave you with that. And we will not see you this coming Sunday because we're going to put up a video. It's July 5th. And instead of meeting in person, instead of doing Zoom, we will be doing a video that wraps up this whole first 7 chapters. So log on to our website, check out the video that we will have for you there under the sermons page, and just get a review of the first 7 chapters, and we'll be moving forward the week after that. So God bless. We'll see you soon.